Some people wear expensive suits to prove their worth. Others reveal it in a single quiet moment when no one is watching. Rain drummed steadily across the concrete levels of an underground parking garage beneath one of Portland's most exclusive charity galas. Luxury SUVs lined the polished floor, their reflections shimmering beneath fluorescent lights while executives laughed inside the glass tower above. Madeline Parker, the 35-year-old CEO of Parker Meridian Group, slipped away from the celebration earlier than anyone expected. Success had filled every headline about her company, yet the silence waiting outside felt far more honest than the applause inside. She adjusted the collar of her camel-colored coat and walked toward her car, grateful for a brief escape from conversations about profits, acquisitions, and public appearances. A few steps later, 3 unfamiliar men appeared from different directions, blocking the open path between her and the elevator. None of them raised their voices. None of them needed to. Their quiet presence alone transformed the empty garage into a place that suddenly felt much smaller. Madeline stopped. Her heartbeat quickened, but she refused to let fear reach her face. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "I'd like to get to my car." One of the men smiled politely without moving aside. "We just need a minute of your time, Miss Parker." She immediately realized they knew exactly who she was. She took one careful step backward, searching for another route, only to discover the second man had already positioned himself there. The distant hum of ventilation fans echoed across the concrete ceiling. Somewhere overhead, thunder rolled across the Oregon sky. Then another voice entered the silence. "She asked you to move." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Yet every word carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime choosing restraint over noise. The 3 men turned together. Standing several yards away was Nathan Cole, a broad-shouldered single father wearing faded work boots, dark jeans, and a rain-soaked utility jacket with the name Cole stitched above one pocket. He had just finished a long maintenance shift inside the neighboring office building and carried nothing more threatening than a weathered lunch cooler and a flashlight clipped to his belt. His face showed neither panic nor pride, only calm determination. "This doesn't concern you," one man replied. Nathan met his eyes without taking another step. "Maybe not," he answered evenly. "But she's trying to leave." The garage became strangely still. Even the rain seemed quieter. Madeline looked from the strangers to the man she had never seen before. There was nothing extraordinary about his clothes, nothing impressive about his appearance except the steady kindness in his expression. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply refused to ignore someone who might need help. One by one, the 3 men exchanged uncertain glances before deciding the moment was no longer worth pursuing. Without another word, they walked away toward a waiting sedan and disappeared into the rainy Portland night. Nathan waited several seconds before speaking again. "Are you okay?" Madeline released a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. "Yes," she answered softly. "Thanks to you." Nathan offered a small nod, as though helping a stranger required no recognition at all. "Good," he said. "Someone's waiting for me at home." Before she could ask his name or offer anything in return, he turned toward the exit, already thinking about the little girl expecting her father to arrive before bedtime, while Madeline Parker stood beneath the cold fluorescent lights, wondering why the most remarkable man she had met all year had walked away without asking for a single thing. Nathan Cole climbed into his aging pickup truck as rain traced slow lines across the windshield. The dashboard clock read 8:37 in the evening. He smiled to himself because, despite the long shift, he still had enough time to stop by the neighborhood grocery store before heading home. His 9-year-old daughter, Ava, had asked for tomato soup and grilled cheese after school that morning, calling it her favorite rainy day dinner. He never liked breaking promises, especially the small ones. 20 minutes later, the front door of their modest house opened before he even reached the porch. Ava hurried outside wearing oversized socks that slid across the wooden floor behind her. She wrapped both arms around him without saying a word at first. Nathan laughed softly and lifted her off the ground. "You were supposed to let your old man get through the front door," he teased. She smiled. "You are late by 7 minutes." "I know," he answered. "I had to help someone." She tilted her head. "Did they need fixing like the broken furnace at Mrs. Dawson's house?" Nathan shook his head gently. "No, they just needed someone to stay calm." Ava accepted that answer because her father rarely explained the good things he did. He believed kindness lost something the moment it became a story about the person giving it. After dinner, while Ava finished her math homework at the kitchen table, Nathan quietly folded tomorrow's work shirt. The stitched name above the pocket had faded after years of washing, but it was still readable. Cole. Nothing fancy. Nothing important to anyone except him. Across the city, the lights inside Madeline Parker's penthouse office still glowed against the Portland skyline. She had changed out of her evening clothes hours earlier, yet she remained standing beside the enormous windows overlooking the Willamette River. Her executive assistant placed a fresh cup of coffee beside her. "You should get some rest," he said carefully. Madeline barely looked away from the rain outside. "Can you find someone for me?" He hesitated. "Who?" "The maintenance worker from tonight." "Do you have a name?" She closed her eyes, replaying the quiet encounter beneath the parking garage lights. "Only part of one," she admitted. "Cole." Her assistant sighed apologetically. "There are hundreds of employees and contractors with that last name in Oregon." Madeline nodded slowly. "Then start with everyone connected to the building." She surprised herself by insisting. It was not curiosity alone that kept her awake. It was confusion. During 15 years of leading billion-dollar negotiations, she had met countless people eager to impress her, flatter her, or gain something from her position. Nathan had asked for nothing. He had not requested a reward. He had not even waited to hear her full thank you. The silence he left behind lingered far longer than any speech delivered inside the gala ballroom. The following morning, Nathan returned to work before sunrise. The office tower slowly awakened around him as elevators hummed and coffee machines filled the hallways with the scent of roasted beans. He checked electrical panels, replaced worn ceiling lights, and greeted security guards by name. Invisible work suited him. He believed the strongest foundations were the ones nobody noticed until they failed. At nearly the same hour, Madeline stepped through the revolving doors of the same building for an executive strategy meeting. As she crossed the marble lobby surrounded by board members and advisors discussing acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, her eyes drifted toward a man changing a light fixture near the reception desk. He climbed carefully down the ladder, reached for his toolbox, and looked up just long enough for their eyes to meet. Neither of them spoke. Yet in that single quiet moment, both realized fate had no intention of allowing strangers to remain strangers for very long. Nathan lowered his eyes with a polite nod before lifting his toolbox and continuing down the hallway as though nothing unusual had happened. Madeline watched him disappear behind a service door while the conversation around her continued without pause. Quarterly projections, investor confidence, expansion plans. Every executive surrounding her spoke with certainty, yet her thoughts remained fixed on the maintenance worker who had walked away twice without asking for recognition. Inside the executive boardroom on the 34th floor, sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. Crystal water glasses rested beside leather portfolios, and digital displays cycled through charts measuring growth in precise percentages. Madeline took her seat at the head of the long walnut table while senior executives settled into their chairs. Richard Holloway, the company's chief operations officer, began presenting renovation updates for a recently acquired technology campus. He smiled confidently. "Everything is ahead of schedule. The building systems are operating perfectly." Before the next slide appeared, a facilities manager entered quietly and whispered something into Richard's ear. Richard frowned, glanced toward the hallway, and motioned impatiently. Moments later, Nathan stepped inside carrying a clipboard and wearing the same faded work shirt. The contrast between him and the tailored suits around the table could not have been greater. Several executives barely looked up. One younger vice president leaned back with an amused smile. "Did maintenance get lost on the way to the basement?" A few restrained chuckles circled the room. Nathan remained composed. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. "I only wanted to report that one of the electrical distribution panels is showing unstable readings. It should be inspected before this afternoon's product demonstration." Richard dismissed the concern with a casual wave. "We have engineers for that." Nathan answered respectfully. "Yes, sir. I simply wanted to make sure someone knew before the building reaches full electrical demand." Another executive folded his arms. "Are you saying our engineering consultants missed something?" Nathan shook his head. I am saying machines usually give small warnings before they give expensive ones. The room fell briefly quiet before another executive smiled with thinly disguised sarcasm. Thank you for your concern. We will let the professionals handle it. Nathan nodded once. Of course. He turned and walked toward the door without another word. Madeline noticed something no one else seemed to see. He had not argued. He had not defended himself. He had delivered the information because it was the responsible thing to do, not because he expected anyone to believe him. As the meeting resumed, she found herself paying less attention to colorful financial projections than to the closed door through which Nathan had disappeared. Nearly an hour later, while executives toured the newly renovated Innovation Center, the overhead lights flickered almost imperceptibly. Large presentation screens dimmed for less than a second before returning to normal. Most people ignored it. Nathan, standing quietly near an electrical cabinet at the far end of the corridor, looked toward the ceiling with calm concentration. He listened to a faint mechanical hum that no one else appeared to notice. Then, without creating alarm, he carefully switched one auxiliary circuit to reduce the electrical load before continuing his inspection. Few people even realized he had acted, but the building settled back into perfect silence, and somewhere inside the walls, a warning had been answered before it could become a problem. From across the lobby, Madeline watched him through the glass and quietly wondered how many times in life the strongest person in the room had been the one everyone overlooked. Nathan spent the rest of the afternoon moving quietly through mechanical rooms and utility corridors while the executive demonstration continued several floors above him. He checked every panel twice, making notes in neat handwriting before tightening the last inspection cover. The unstable reading had settled after he redistributed part of the electrical load, but something still felt unusual. Years of experience had taught him that equipment often whispered long before it failed. He trusted those whispers more than polished reports. Upstairs, investors from across the Pacific Northwest gathered inside the Innovation Center to watch Parker Meridian unveil its newest artificial intelligence platform. Camera crews adjusted lighting, assistants arranged presentation materials, and the atmosphere carried the polished confidence of a company celebrating another milestone. Richard Holloway welcomed guests with practiced charisma. Everything you will see today represents the future, he announced proudly. As applause filled the room, Madeline remained thoughtful. Her attention drifted toward the maintenance report resting beside her tablet. She remembered Nathan's calm warning and found herself reading it again instead of reviewing her speech. The words were simple, direct, and free from exaggeration. They reflected the man who had written them. Moments later, one of the massive display walls briefly dimmed before returning to full brightness. Several guests looked around with mild curiosity. Richard smiled confidently. Just a harmless calibration. The audience relaxed, but Madeline noticed Nathan standing near the rear service entrance. He was watching the ceiling instead of the screens, listening instead of speaking. He quietly approached the facility's supervisor and pointed toward a monitoring panel. The supervisor barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "We are in the middle of an executive presentation," he whispered impatiently. "This is not the time." Nathan answered with the same respectful tone he always used. "I understand. I only recommend reducing the auxiliary demonstration load for a few minutes." The supervisor sighed. "Please leave it alone." Nathan gave a polite nod and stepped back without arguing. He had delivered the message. The decision was no longer his. Another minute passed. Then a faint alert appeared on the maintenance display hidden inside the service corridor. Nathan read the numbers once and acted immediately. Without entering the presentation area or interrupting the speakers, he carefully disconnected a non-essential demonstration circuit that supplied decorative lighting along one side of the auditorium. Half of the accent lights faded gently. Several executives turned toward the rear of the room in surprise. Richard's expression tightened. "Who authorized that?" he demanded. Before Nathan could answer, the supervisor pointed directly toward him. He shut it down. A murmur spread across the room. One executive folded his arms with visible annoyance. "I knew this would happen," he muttered. "Maintenance always thinks they know better than the engineers." Nathan remained completely still. "The primary systems are safe," he said calmly. "I only reduced unnecessary demand." Richard looked frustrated. "You interrupted a presentation worth millions of dollars over a guess." Nathan lowered his eyes respectfully. No, sir. Over a precaution. The room fell quiet for only a moment before Richard ordered the demonstration to continue. Most people returned their attention to the stage. Madeline did not. She looked at Nathan standing alone near the service door, accepting criticism without resentment. And for the first time, she began to wonder whether confidence sounded less convincing than quiet conviction. Somewhere beyond the applause, hidden behind steel walls and electrical conduits, the building settled into a steady rhythm once again, and no one in the audience realized how close they had come to learning that the greatest acts of responsibility often looked exactly like unnecessary inconvenience. Nathan expected to be called into the facilities office before the end of the day, and he was right. The supervisor sighed as he closed the door behind them. Richard is not happy, he admitted. Several executives believe you embarrassed the company in front of investors. Nathan listened without interruption. I understand. They are placing a note in your personnel file. Nathan simply nodded. If that is what they think is fair. The supervisor stared at him in disbelief. You are not even going to defend yourself? Nathan offered a tired smile. Sometimes defending yourself costs more than keeping your peace. He picked up his toolbox, thanked the supervisor for letting him explain his concerns, and quietly returned to work. That evening, the fading sunlight painted the streets of Portland in soft shades of gold as Nathan parked outside a neighborhood pediatric clinic. Inside the waiting room, children colored pictures while parents filled out insurance forms. Ava sat in a blue chair with a book resting on her knees, smiling the moment she saw her father walk through the door. You made it, she whispered. I told you I would. Nathan knelt beside her and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. How was school? Good, she answered. Mrs. Reynolds says my science project might go to the district fair. His face brightened immediately. I never doubted you. When the nurse called Ava's name, Nathan walked beside her into the examination room. The doctor reviewed her latest test results with gentle optimism. She is doing well, he explained. Her heart is stable, but we still want regular follow-up visits over the next several months. Nathan thanked him sincerely. Medical appointments had become part of their routine since Ava's diagnosis several years earlier. Every extra shift, every weekend repair, every delayed purchase had one purpose. Keeping his daughter healthy mattered more than anything else. Across town, Madeline sat alone in her office long after the rest of the executive floor had emptied. She replayed the events of the afternoon again and again. Something about the maintenance worker refusing to argue stayed with her. Most people fought desperately to protect their pride. Nathan had protected only the building and then quietly accepted the criticism that followed. Unable to ignore the feeling, she asked her assistant to gather basic employment records before leaving for the night. The folder arrived less than an hour later. There was very little inside. Nathan Cole, maintenance contractor, widower, one dependent daughter, excellent attendance. No disciplinary history until that afternoon. She paused at a reimbursement form from a local children's hospital and realized the overtime hours he volunteered for were not about ambition. They were about medical bills. The next morning, as Madeline's driver passed through downtown traffic, she noticed a familiar pickup truck parked outside the same pediatric clinic. She asked the driver to continue without stopping, respecting a boundary she had no right to cross. Yet through the passenger window, she caught a brief glimpse of Nathan kneeling beside Ava as they laughed over a paper cup of hot chocolate before heading home. There were no cameras, no executives, no audience waiting to applaud. Only a father giving his daughter his complete attention. For the first time in years, Madeline questioned whether success should be measured by stock prices or by quiet moments like that one, where love asked for nothing and dignity never needed to introduce itself. Nathan arrived at work before sunrise as he always did, expecting another ordinary day of quiet repairs and unnoticed responsibilities. Instead, he found two security officers waiting outside the facilities office. Their expressions were polite, but unusually formal. One of them handed him a temporary suspension notice while avoiding direct eye contact. This is only administrative, the officer explained. Questions have been raised about your actions during the investor presentation. Nathan accepted the envelope without complaint. How long will it take? We do not know yet. He thanked them anyway, gathered the few personal items from his locker, and walked calmly through the lobby. Employees whispered as he passed. Some remembered the dimmed lights during the presentation. Others repeated rumors they barely understood. By lunchtime, the story had already grown into something entirely different. Someone claimed the maintenance contractor had deliberately interfered with the demonstration. Someone else insisted he had been trying to impress the chief executive officer after meeting her in the parking garage. Every retelling drifted farther from the truth. Nathan never answered a single rumor. Across town, an anonymous email reached several members of Parker Meridian's executive board. Attached were carefully edited security images from the parking garage showing Nathan standing near Madeline on the rainy evening outside the gala. Missing from the images was everything that had happened before he arrived. The message implied that the encounter had been staged to gain access to the company. Richard Holloway frowned as he read the anonymous accusation. "This does not look good," he muttered. When the file reached Madeline's desk, she studied every photograph in complete silence. Something felt wrong. The images showed moments, but not the story. They raised questions without providing answers. She remembered Nathan's eyes that night. There had been no calculation in them, only concern. "Find the original security footage," she instructed her assistant. "Not screenshots. Everything." "The parking garage belongs to the event center," her assistant replied. "It may take time. Then start today." Meanwhile, Nathan drove to Ava's elementary school to pick her up. She climbed into the pickup carrying a science notebook against her chest, but her usual smile seemed smaller than normal. "Daddy," she asked softly after fastening her seat belt, "did you lose your job?" Nathan glanced toward her with gentle surprise. "Who told you that?" One of the parents heard people talking outside the school. Nathan rested both hands on the steering wheel before answering. "I have not lost it. I just have to wait while people ask questions." Ava looked out the window as autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk. "You always tell me that telling the truth matters." "It does." "Then why are people saying things that are not true?" Nathan smiled sadly. "Because sometimes the truth walks more slowly than rumors. But the truth usually catches up." Ava reached across the center console and quietly held her father's hand for a moment before letting go. At that same hour, Madeline sat alone in the executive conference room, watching the anonymous photographs one more time. The silence inside the room felt heavier than before. Whoever had sent those images clearly wanted Nathan blamed for something he had never sought. She closed the folder, looked toward the rain falling beyond the glass walls, and made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not allow a man of quiet dignity to stand alone while the truth waited outside the door. 3 days later, the original security footage finally arrived from the parking garage. Unlike the carefully cropped images that had spread through the company, this recording began several minutes earlier and continued several minutes longer. Madeline sat alone in the executive screening room while her legal advisor quietly started the video. The screen showed her leaving the charity gala, walking toward the parking garage, and then slowing as 3 unfamiliar men positioned themselves around her. The recording captured no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only an unmistakable attempt to prevent her from continuing on her way. Then another figure entered the frame. Nathan appeared exactly as she remembered him, carrying his worn lunch cooler, pausing only long enough to understand the situation before calmly placing himself between her and the strangers. He never raised his hands. He never acted with anger. He simply stood there with steady confidence until the 3 men chose to leave. When the recording ended, the room remained silent. Madeline looked toward her legal advisor. "This is the complete file?" "Every second. And the anonymous photographs." Taken from only a few frames after everything important had already happened, Madeline closed her eyes for a brief moment. Someone wanted him to look guilty instead of honorable. That same afternoon, she requested maintenance logs from the day of the investor presentation. The chief building engineer reviewed the electrical records with increasing surprise. The auxiliary circuit was overloaded, he admitted after comparing system data. If the additional demonstration equipment had remained connected much longer, the protection system would have shut down part of the presentation automatically. Madeline looked up. "Who reduced the load?" The engineer pointed toward a timestamp on the report. "Nathan Cole. His adjustment stabilized the system before it reached its limit." Another quiet truth surfaced. The interruption that executives had criticized had likely prevented a much larger disruption. Within an hour, Madeline called an emergency meeting of the executive board. Richard Holloway entered confidently, expecting another discussion about public relations. Instead, the lights dimmed, and the full parking garage recording appeared on the large screen. No one spoke while the footage played. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as the final seconds faded into black. Then the maintenance records replaced the video, followed by the engineer's written findings confirming Nathan's judgment about the electrical load. Richard stared at the documents in disbelief. "Why was I never shown this?" he asked quietly. Madeline answered with calm honesty. "Because everyone accepted the first story before looking for the true one." The room became very still. No phones vibrated. No papers rustled. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter than before. Madeline stood slowly and looked around the table. A good man protected this company twice in 1 week. First, he protected me when nobody else was there. Then he protected this building when nobody wanted to hear him. In return, we questioned his character instead of our own judgment. No one offered a response. Several executives lowered their eyes toward the polished table. Richard finally removed his glasses and spoke almost in a whisper. "We owe him an apology." Madeline nodded gently. "Yes, but apologies should never remain inside this room. They belong where the misunderstanding began." As silence settled over every seat at the table, each person understood that Nathan had never fought to defend his reputation because he had trusted the truth to arrive in its own time, and at last, it had walked through the door. Nathan returned to Parker Meridian the following Monday, expecting nothing more than a meeting with human resources. He wore the same neatly pressed work shirt, the same worn boots, and carried the same weathered toolbox that had accompanied him through countless quiet mornings. As he stepped into the lobby, he noticed something unusual. Conversations slowed. Employees who had once hurried past him without a glance now paused. Several offered small, respectful nods. Nathan responded with the same gentle smile he always had, unaware of everything that had happened inside the executive offices during the previous 48 hours. A receptionist approached him with visible nervousness. "Mr. Cole, the chief executive officer would like to see you in the auditorium." Nathan blinked in surprise. "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir. Everyone is already waiting." He followed her through wide hallways until the doors of the company auditorium opened before him. Hundreds of employees filled the seats. Department managers stood along the walls. Members of the executive board occupied the front row. The room became completely silent as Nathan entered carrying his toolbox in one hand. He looked around with quiet confusion, wondering if someone had made a mistake. Madeline Parker stepped onto the stage holding neither prepared notes nor a teleprompter remote. She looked directly at Nathan before turning to face the audience. "There are moments when a company has an opportunity to prove what it truly believes," she began. "Not through advertising, not through quarterly reports, but through the way it treats people whose names rarely appear in meetings like this." The large screen behind her displayed the complete parking garage recording. Every employee watched as Nathan calmly stepped between her and an uncomfortable situation before quietly walking away without asking for recognition. The next recording appeared beside it, showing the electrical monitoring system and the engineer's report confirming that Nathan's decision had protected the building from a significant disruption. No dramatic music filled the room. No applause interrupted the silence. Only truth remained. Madeline looked toward Nathan once more. This man never introduced himself as a hero. He never demanded to be believed. He simply chose responsibility when it was easier to stay silent, and kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. She paused, allowing the words to settle. "Nathan, on behalf of everyone in this company, I owe you an apology." Richard Holloway stood next. His voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. "So do I. I judged your position instead of your character. I was wrong." One by one, department leaders rose from their seats. No one defended past decisions. No one searched for excuses. The room that had once questioned Nathan now honored him through honest accountability. Nathan remained still for a long moment before finally speaking. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I hope nobody feels embarrassed because of me. We all miss things sometimes. What matters is what we choose after we see them." His answer surprised everyone. There was no trace of bitterness. No desire to make anyone feel smaller than they already did. Madeline felt something shift deep inside her heart. She had spent years surrounded by talented people, brilliant negotiators, and influential leaders. Yet the strongest person she had ever met was standing on a stage in a faded maintenance uniform, carrying a scratched metal toolbox and offering grace to the very people who had doubted him. In that quiet auditorium, respect became something far greater than admiration, and without fully realizing it, Madeline understood that what had begun as gratitude was slowly becoming something her heart could no longer ignore. Nearly 3 months passed, and life settled into a quieter rhythm. Nathan returned to his regular maintenance schedule as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened. He repaired heating systems before sunrise, replaced worn wiring after lunch, and always made it home in time to help Ava with homework at the kitchen table. The applause from the auditorium faded into memory, but his habits never changed. He still believed that character was measured by ordinary days rather than remarkable moments. One crisp autumn afternoon, a black sedan pulled into the gravel driveway outside his small home. Nathan stepped onto the porch expecting a delivery driver. Instead, Madeline Parker climbed out carrying a simple cardboard box with no company logo and no security team following behind her. She smiled with quiet uncertainty. "I hope I am not interrupting dinner." Nathan returned the smile. "You are just in time. Ava is making grilled cheese sandwiches, and she believes nobody should leave hungry." Madeline laughed softly before accepting the invitation inside. The little house smelled of tomato soup, fresh bread, and cinnamon. Family photographs lined the walls, telling the story of a life built not on luxury, but on love. Ava greeted Madeline with the fearless kindness only children possess. "Dad says you are very busy," she said. "You should still eat." During dinner, nobody discussed board meetings or headlines. They talked about school science projects, favorite hiking trails in Oregon, old pickup trucks that refused to quit, and the joy of watching rain fall from a warm front porch. For the first time in many years, Madeline forgot she was responsible for thousands of employees. She simply felt like another person sitting around a family table. After the dishes were washed, she handed Nathan the cardboard box she had carried into the house. Inside rested a framed architectural drawing, several legal documents, and a handwritten letter. Nathan looked up in confusion. "What is this?" Madeline took a slow breath. "It is the beginning of the Grace Cole Children's Heart Center. It will provide financial assistance for families whose children need long-term cardiac care. I named it after your late wife because every child deserves the same hope she wanted for Ava." Nathan stared silently at the papers while emotion filled his eyes. "You did not have to do this," he whispered. Madeline gently shook her head. "Maybe not. But kindness has a way of asking to be passed forward." Ava quietly wrapped her arms around both of them, smiling with the simple certainty that love often understands before adults do. Nathan looked toward the fading sunset beyond the kitchen window. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I saved someone in a parking garage that rainy night." Madeline smiled through grateful tears. "You did, but it was not only me. You reminded me that success means very little if it is not shared with compassion." They stood together on the front porch as evening settled across the quiet neighborhood. No reporters waited outside. No cameras recorded the moment. The wind carried the scent of pine through the cool Oregon air while the first porch lights flickered on across the street. Nathan reached for Madeline's hand, and she held his without hesitation. Neither of them rushed to define what the future would become. Some stories did not need grand declarations. They only needed two people willing to walk the same road with dignity, grace, and quiet faith. And in the end, the greatest reward was never recognition, wealth, or applause. It was discovering that one ordinary act of kindness, offered without expecting anything in return, had gently led two wounded hearts home.